From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Bianca Hall. It's Monday, September 6. A cavalcade of motorhomes has been arriving in the far western New South Wales town of Wilcannia, where about 1 in 7 of the population has tested positive for COVID-19. As of yesterday, 98 people in the town of 745 had contracted the virus. Amid concerns about the effect of the virus on vulnerable Aboriginal communities, the New South Wales government sent the caravans in to help people living in big households self-isolate. Police are patrolling the streets, delivering food parcels to people who are self-isolating. But there have been criticisms about the level of support being offered, with one COVID-positive woman angry she had been forced to wash her clothes in the river. To tell us more, I'm joined by photographer Nick Moyer, who returned from Wilcannia on the weekend. Welcome to Please Explain, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You travelled to Wilcannia with Indigenous photographer Rhett Wyman. What were your impressions when you first got there?
That it was very quiet. I've travelled to Wilcannia before, quite a few times through my career. And while the town is usually, not bustling, there's usually kids on bikes and people moving around to the local shop and, plenty of passers-by and tourists as well came in this time, and there was nobody on the streets. It's just very, very quiet. So initially, as we arrived, we were a little flummoxed as to what to photograph. It was about 3 p.m, so the sun was a couple of hours away from going down. But yeah, there was nobody on the streets. We had heard that people were camping out in as they were going into isolation in some of their yards. But as we drove around town, we couldn't really see anybody till we really started looking. We could see a few people in there on their porches. So we just decided the only way to move forward was to do it on foot. Initially, we hadn't planned to be filing for that day. This was really just a bit of a recon. But after we started walking around, and generally people are a bit, very cautious of, city media. But particularly, Rhett, is just very engaging. And he's a good-looking lad, and so am I. So we just walked around town, and a couple of women, Aboriginal women in a car pulled up to go, what are you larrikins up to? So we explained ourselves, and they said, well, old Auntie Catherine's stuck down in the isolation area and everybody's forgotten about her. And there's a whole pile of our mob down there. And so we went, wow, bang, that's exactly what we came for, like for the first day. And sure enough, we drove to outside of town. So it's about 2 kilometres out to the east of town is a caravan park where people who can't isolate from the rest of their family are in a number of small cabins, and they're fairly new. And look, it's not like they were in a horrific condition or anything like that. But the issues were a lot of technology out there, but also people who were confirmed with COVID weren't allowed to use the facilities, as in washing their clothes and stuff like that. So Catherine, immediately spoke up and said, right, yep, well, I can't wash my clothes, can't do this, can't do that. She was pretty unhappy, and she was evidently sick. So, we both made sure that, we definitely had a decent amount of space between us. And then she said, I'm about to go and wash a couple of my clothes in the lagoon. Immediately that was like, bingo, that's a front page picture.
That was a really powerful photo that Rhett took, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was amazing when something like that just falls into your lap, particularly as, let's say, New South Wales Health can be very controlling. And so when the voiceless suddenly have a voice and you become their conduit, Rhett learned how loud that shout can be if you do it right. So we felt very vindicated that we had gone out there. We weren't the first media that had gone out there, but I think our impact was probably the loudest heard, particularly using such strong imagery and finding somebody who felt that they were not being looked after properly and were so, prepared to go on the record and be photographed with their problems.
And she felt like she'd been forgotten.
Yes. And so a lot of their families had felt that they'd been forgotten. My personal feeling was I don't think necessarily the townspeople had forgotten them. They just suddenly were thrown in a position where they had 10% of their population with this virus. And rural towns, especially one as Wilcannia, is actually very, very supportive to one another. That's how they survive. And actually, Wilcannia is in a pretty good state these days compared to how I've seen it in the past. It's pretty good. But they're up against it with something where normally all the community comes together, but they can't. They can't even talk to one another at the moment, face to face. So very difficult to be organised. I think that a lot of what they were doing was kind of just trying to put fingers in the dikes, and that's where so many people are getting infected and have to be isolated. That's where things are going to start falling apart when you put that much pressure on. So Catherine certainly felt that she'd been let down in just some of the basics of how she's supposed to live healthily in that environment.
There's a massive police presence there and the army. How are they being received on the ground?
At first, people were a bit nervous, but the Assistant Commissioner, Brett Greentree, had arrived, and they'd been very, very positive at really trying to calm everybody and working very cooperatively with everybody else, including the RFS, the SES, New South Wales Health, the RFDS. There's actually a lot of organisations, arriving or had been on the ground already. Now it's all just starting to come together. But yeah, certainly Brendan Adams, who's from the local radio station, he talked about initially people being a little bit worried about, they hadn't seen this, army on the ground, what they were there for. But of course, there's no weapons or anything like that. They literally just saw them going around and handing out food. And that's the limit of what they're doing. There's a lot of just going up to houses and just saying, how's everybody doing? And I guess just keeping a bit of human contact, which is really difficult. I mean, the town is at night, there's no noise except for barking dogs. It's eerie. For a community that's, particularly the Aboriginal community there, that are so, multi-generational, like often very much talking and collaborating and helping each other out. It's the antithesis to how they would normally help each other.
Yeah, it must be really tough for people.
Yeah.
When COVID first hit Wilcannia, there were food shortages and reports of people sleeping in tents and so on. What was the situation like when you left with all the motorhomes coming? Were people able to move into the motorhomes yet?
I don't think so. I think they're still sorting out all the sewage issues and like how clothes are washed and food preparation. You've got close to 100 people now with COVID. So you've got to be able to prepare and give food to some of these people in isolation. And some of them aren't well. I mean, they're not like hospitalization stage, but they're not well, and getting food to them safely. So you need to have staff out there who know what they're doing. So, yeah, it looks like the preparations and infrastructure to look after the town is about to come online, and the procedures for all the staff to do it safely as well. There's a very big base camp at Wilcannia Oval. It's well set up. And from there, I'm certain they will be able to coordinate helping people. However, so it's about like 3 weeks, I guess, for them now. So a lot of people would say, it's a long time coming. But I wouldn't certainly blame any of the Wilcannia locals for that.
Are there plans in place for if someone does get sick enough to need hospitalisation? What happens then?
I'm sure there would be. There's a base hospital in Wilcannia.
That is a very small hospital, isn't it? So if you got COVID positive people in there, it would presumably put a lot of pressure on the other services too, right?
I would be guessing that the nearest major hospital is Broken Hill, that ambulances, and that's about an hour and a half away, ambulances and the RFDS would be, well prepared to do that. And I would be guessing that's exactly what they're doing in preparation for having to have, 10 to 20, looking at vaguely the statistics, 10 to 20 people having to go out there.
After you left Wilcannia, you went to Dubbo in Western New South Wales, where there's more than 580 cases. What was the situation like there?
Well, Dubbo is a city, so while it was quiet, it was very much like if you were in southwest Sydney. There were people going about doing their businesses. Most of the shops were closed, but really you couldn't tell much different from Sydney, really. It's a major infrastructure and transport hub, so all that was still going on. There's not a lot of cars on the road. It's all trucks. And the testing facility is most days pretty busy, which is at the showgrounds. So plenty of cars lining up going through that testing facility. Including myself, I went through there after coming out of Wilcannia just to double check, and I got my results very quickly, actually. Got mine back within 4 hours.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah.
Better than Sydney.
And as far as you know, is Auntie Catherine still washing her clothes in the Darling River?
I don't know. Rhett, I think, was trying to contact her yesterday, but I don't know. I would guess that there would have been some sort of reaction and things may have been changed, but hard to say. When I tried to get back out there was a New South Wales health vehicle sort of very obviously in there, so I just left them alone.
Okay, well, thanks very much for shedding light on what's happening in Wilcannia, and you and Rhett taking the photos that helps give people a voice out there.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to go there and a pleasure to talk to some of the people in the community out there. It's an amazing community. They are really doing the very, very best. I mean, a number of times out there where I actually just was like, it's amazing to see people all working together. Groups that normally don't particularly like working together all really got one aim in hand, and that's to help their fellow Wilcannians.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Chi Wong. The journalists, editors, photographers, producers and tech team at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald work tirelessly to cover the news that matters. For coverage you can trust, visit our websites or buy our papers. To support our journalism, you can subscribe via our homepages or just search subscribe, the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. I'm Bianca Hall. Thanks for listening.